So good morning. I'm really happy to be here, not least because being based in Scotland, it's quite a delight to arrive in the airport and see a wall of tartan. And then also to get to the hotel and see the lion rampant fluttering outside my bedroom window. So I feel very much at home. So Anders, thank you so much, and bring good wishes from your old Scotland colleagues. And I'm also, I guess, unashamedly part of that those in the audience and those across the movement who very much see Beyond GDP measures as a key tool to transform the economy. Because so often when you look at all the challenges facing the world and you become a bit like my 5-year-old nephew and you say, but why, you find yourself coming to the economy, how it is designed, how it is purposed, how it prices things, and who is winning and who's losing out of that economic model. So I come, I guess, speaking for a growing movement that is saying we need to transform how the economic system operates, and I want to try and put a little bit some of the measurement conversation and agenda in that context. And I guess what we've seen, I'm going to have to move you again, Elora, if you can see my punchline. There we go. Put them there. Because we have got, globally the context of a fairly, consistently rising GDP. We've got increases in average earnings, and I say that word average with an underline, increases in the stock market, and so on. But against that backdrop, we've got increasing in 0 hours contract, increasing precariousness in the labour market, increasing sense of insecurity in that people's lives are out of control, and increasing in despair. And we see people turning to coping strategies, whether it's... Is this going to work? There we go. He's in the way, isn't he? Right, down there.
I'm not doing that.
I'm going to shrink you a little bit, Elora.
My microphone.
But we do see people turning to these coping strategies, whether it's through the pillbox, as you see here, or through the ballot box. If my slide is going to click. This is really... What am I pressing wrong here? Is that not? There we go. And we see, and I've just been watching the Australian election in the last few days, which is my home country, with a bit of despair. We see this sort of growing xenophobia. And we also see the growing measures around the extent of climate breakdown and climate crisis that are just showing how urgently we need to transform our economic system. And the global assessment that came out a few weeks ago pulled no punches in saying that it is the economic system that is the root cause of our loss of biodiversity. And the bad news is when we look across the world for an economy that is capable of delivering in terms of lifting people above a social foundation and not putting excess pressure on the planet in terms of not breaching those planetary boundaries, and encapsulated by the donut that I saw you had a tiny bit of an image on that you skipped through, Marco. When we look around the world for evidence that a country is able, and an economy is able to do that, we draw a blank. Because countries are either doing okay, and again in an average sense of lifting citizens above a fairly basic social foundation, and average is really important here because of course we see so much inequality within countries. But they're doing so while putting grave pressure on the planet, or they're not putting much pressure on the planet, but they're also not delivering in terms of social and basic needs for their citizens. And if we had countries that we could look to, we would see them in the top left-hand corner of this screen. And the bad news is that it's pretty much empty. Vietnam kind of getting close there. I know you'll ask, there's Canada. And so what we're getting in response is, really the evidence is that we need to redesign the economic system quite fundamentally. But instead what we're being offered is reactive defensive expenditure in terms of failure demand in social policy, in terms of defensive expenditure in environmental terms, and even in our own lives, as Serge Latouche would talk about, we're reaching for these consolation goods to console ourselves from our stressed and alienating and precarious lives. And all of that adds up to a benefit on the GDP ledger. All this reactive spending sees GDP going up. And yet we're not preventing, here he is again in the wrong position. What we're touting this up as a win when all we're being content to is just to tweak and redistribute and try and put sticking plasters over the problems that we've created by the nature of the economic system. And back in the, it's because I moved Eli, I think. Right.
Middle one seemed to be
Is this working? No.
Click on the presentation and then next.
There we go, thank you. I'll move him again. There we go. That's what happens, I move Eli and then it freezes.
You can move him mostly off screen, so you just see a corner of that window.
Is that not really rude? Okay, sorry. I'm in Canada, I should be really polite, shouldn't I? So
You moved around and now it
I know.
disappeared.
I hope you're not feeling nauseous. But essentially, you remember back, some of you won't remember, back in 1983, Reagan said that there is no limits to growth because there's no limits to our imagination. But actually, I think what is constraining us to imagining a world beyond growth is our limited imagination. And it is that we're boxed in by this straitjacket of GDP and all the assumptions that are inherent in it in terms of trickle down and that markets are always at best and that production is the best way to solve social problems. I'll click again. Right, it's the last time I'm moving you. And we've got this situation where we're looking across the economy and we're seeing that the current system, it's not intelligent given all the waste and all the expenditure in reacting to try and fix it. It's certainly not beautiful. It's not just when you look at the extent of economic and social inequalities, it's certainly not virtuous. And people are realising more and more that it's not delivering the goods. And so we're beginning to despise and despair that. And again, we see that every day with people coming out on the streets or turning to extreme apparently solutions in the ballot box. And yet we don't yet know what to put in its place, apparently. This was John Maynard Keynes writing in 1933. And I think the good news is that now we do know what to put in its place because we've since then had decades of evidence and activism and people just getting on and rolling up their sleeves and trying to create what we're calling a wellbeing economy. And it's essentially an economy that puts collective well-being of people and planet at the forefront. It prioritises fundamental human needs. It ensures that resources are shared fairly. And it also recognises and understands and embraces the fact that the economy is embedded in society and the two of them are embedded in nature. And when we're looking around the world for understanding of where the mandate and the sense and the drive for that, we see it in great scholarship, whether it's one of my favourites, Manfred Max Neef or Amartya Sen or Martha Nussbaum. We also see that on the evidence that's coming out from neuroscientists when they're looking at brain scans and telling us what lights up when we're stressed or when we're calmer because we're in relationships or we're contented because we have a sense of economic security or we're spending time in nature when our cortisol levels go down. But I'd say even more importantly, we hear it when we sit down and have conversations with people wherever they are in the world, whether it's in the slums of Delhi or the Amazon in Brazil or some of the post-industrial old shipbuilding towns in places in Glasgow where I've done my qualitative work. And you can see again and again, you hear the same conversations about what really matters to people because this is what makes us innately human. And so essentially building a wellbeing economy is about being more ambitious for the economy. It's about getting the economy to do more of the heavy lifting and not just relying on government and other agencies to redistribute or put the sticking plaster or clean up after the mess that we've created. It's actually saying, let's get things right first time round by creating an economy that is purposed for what humans and our planet need. And different measures of progress are absolutely fundamental to that because we need to align them with what humans need. We need to align them with those pillars of a wellbeing economy. And the momentum is certainly building, and we've heard that already from Anders. I mean, stretches back decades, Bobby Kennedy's speech, and then of course the limits to growth the same year. King of Bhutan declares that G&H is more important than GDP. Rush forward a few years, we had the global financial crisis. Then, of course, as we've just heard, the Commission on Measures of Progress, the UN report a couple of years later around a new development paradigm with Bhutan and Costa Rica in the chair. Of course, then the SDGs. Just last autumn, we had 238 academics calling for the EU to have an EU Stability and Wellbeing Pact, and that was just updated a few weeks ago, saying actually, EU, what you need is a Sustainability and Wellbeing Pact. Again, we've had the update of the OECD report. We've had the Wellbeing Economy Governments Project launch, which I'll come back to in a minute. My tiny little organisation was founded last year, and again, I'll tell you about that in a minute. But I'd say most importantly, we've had young people coming out on the street and starting to stand up for their futures. We've got Extinction Rebellion, we've got the Global Assessment on Biodiversity, and again, as I've already said, we have had these academics now across disciplines starting to say we need to repurpose what our economy is about. And so, turning to my wonderfully adopted home country, you're going to hear from Bhutan and New Zealand later, and of course lots about what's going on in Canada. But I hope you can forgive me for being a little bit parochial, and particularly when it's Scotland. If you can't talk about Scotland in Nova Scotia, then I'm in trouble. But Scotland, of course, has got something called the National Performance Framework that puts at its very heart the purpose of creating a successful country where success is defined in increasing collective well-being, but also it talks about values around kindness and compassion. It's quite an extraordinary, beautiful document. As we've talked about, we're yet to see it really make a huge difference in terms of policy coherence, but we are starting to get there. And I'm really proud to say that Scotland has been one of the leaders in instigating this small, but I think potentially really game-changing partnership of governments that are saying we understand that in the 21st century, GDP is not how we should understand development. And what we need to do is work together to build these wellbeing economies. And this is us launching at the OECD Wellbeing Forum. John, I think you were just in the audience just behind where that photo was taken. But here you've got New Zealand, you've got Iceland, you've got the OECD, and you've got our friend, your colleague, Marco Joseph Stiglitz. And what these governments are doing is rolling up their sleeves and saying, we don't have all the answers, but we want to collaborate and learn and share and work together to build wellbeing economies. And this is me trying to take a subtle photo of the First Minister in Scotland. This happened just at the beginning of May, and it was the launch of the We Go Policy Labs. And it was launched rather beautifully in Adam Smith's final residential home, Panmure House in Edinburgh. And we have here the First Minister of Scotland, the Prime Minister of Iceland, and your colleague Carrie from the OECD. And one of the things that Nicola Sturgeon said in her speech is that she recognised just the extent to which GDP has become to be seen as the main measure of progress, and yet also that the limitations are firmly in view. I don't think we need to talk so much anymore about the flaws of GDP. What we need to do is get on and start working together to put in place designing a different economy. And so the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, in terms of galvanising that movement, is to work to connect all those diverse actors, whether it's progressive businesses, whether it's policymakers, whether it's academics, working to create a different economy. Just like raising a barn, actually, as you said, Jeff, I mean, we'll only get there if we collaborate. So this is our job, and rather lovely in a way that Wellbeing Economy Alliance shortens to we all. And so we're about connecting and amplifying the profiles and really ensuring that together we can start to change the conversation. I think you said, Marco, in your comments around this new vocabulary. And I think if we can shift the conversation, this was a picture that was sent to me by a friend of mine who was working on the Equal Marriage campaign in Australia a few years ago. And essentially it's a cartoon version of the Overton window. That if we can just move the discussion and build the public appetite and make things more acceptable and more sensible in the eyes of policymakers, because it's rare to find one of these amazing policymakers that we've got in We Go. We need to help them feel that they've got a movement and momentum on their side. So that's what We Go, We All is definitely about. And what's really wonderful is that we're being joined across the world by young people who are saying we want to be part of this movement in transforming the economy. We've just launched a citizens platform that you can all join, where whoever you are in whatever sphere you're operating, you can be part of a movement and connect with others to share hope and share ideas and just have each other's back a little bit, because this is a really tough, lonely journey when you're trying to shake the system, because the system will bite back, and we can talk about that later. But we've got now over 90 members, and they are so extraordinarily diverse. They are the huge, big networks, the ones who are working within the mainstream, the more radical ones. And we've also got local hubs. And Scotland had its big event last year called the Wealth of Nations 2.0, building the conditions of well-being. Because, of course, in Old English, wealth meant the conditions of well-being. And I just want to just do a blatant plug. Let's have We Can. We absolutely need to have a local hub here. And I've been having conversations with colleagues in Toronto and Montreal the last few days. So if anyone wants to be part of that, please talk to me about it over the next few days. But because this is an academic conference and you like questions and more research projects, I just want to finally offer a few dilemmas from someone who used to work quite deeply in the measurement space but is now seeing it as a vital part of this growing movement. And some of the questions that I think haven't yet been nailed is, yes, a dashboard makes so much sense, but how do we communicate that in a world of 140 characters and even only old people use Twitter now. Young people are on Instagram and they just have photos and a few hashtags. How do we take that translation question of a dashboard into something where people want to understand things quickly and at a glance? Also, and we've already heard, and as you were saying, how much the low public profile of some of these measures, I mean, they start with the best intentions of better aligning policy with what communities really need, and yet they become rather technical interpretations of that. How do we circle back and make them so relevant and accessible and intrinsic and sort of, I guess, instinctive to communities? I mean, wouldn't it just be a lot easier if we had, instead of GDP, governments measuring how many girls ride their bikes to school? I mean, we need those sort of really simple communication techniques. And also, as someone who's a student of deliberative democracy and someone who so often values those discussions with communities to really build the sense of what a different economy looks like, the question of participation is a fraught one, because it really matters for instrumental reasons. And a project I ran in Scotland several years ago now, the Humankind Index, we saw that because we had gone out and deliberated with Scottish people, the Scottish government and the First Minister found it very hard to ignore. So there's instrumental reasons for ensuring that you build your measures with participation at the heart, though there's a trade-off with the international comparability. But I also think there's a much more important reason for participation. And because if we are going to really transform the economy, we need to talk about a huge power shift. And we won't shift power if we're going beyond GDP with something that's better, but is still created by the elites of the current system. And so participation in how we build our beyond GDP measures matters because it prefigures the sort of power shift that we need to grapple with and we need to build across the economic system. So we have to embrace the importance of including communities in how we build these different measures of progress. Thank you very so much.